Hello, this is Mesos Orum, and welcome to S.F.M.L tutorials. Today, we'll be constructing a Sprites class. First, we'll make a header file. Say header, Sprites.h. Next, we'll make a C++ file. Same name, Sprites.c++. Say sharp include Sprites.h. Let's move this over here, go in there. We'll be including textures.h, which we made in the last video. Let's move this back up. Now we'll make our class Sprites, and inherit from public SF Sprite, and make this as usual, and public. For our constructor, we will say Sprites standard string, and we need the address, so Sprite address, and default that as nothing. Then we will say SF vector to u Sprite size, which we need to have a default size, so we will say 16 by 16. Then we will make our deconstructor, Sprites. Because of the way that SFML 3.0 works, we will need a temporary texture, SF texture, temp text, and we need to call our textures class, so we will say textures, pointer textures. We will also need to know the coordinates of our texture, so we will say SF vector to I text chord. We also need a frame rate, so we will say float frame timer and float frame timer max. Now we can initialize our timers, void init timers, and we can define these three. And clean this up. By default, we will set both frame timer and frame timer max to 0. Frame timer equals 0.0f, and frame timer max equals 0.0f. In our deconstructor, we will just delete textures. Our constructor needs to inherit, so we will say inherit from SF Sprite as temp texture. Inside our constructor, we will say init timers and set our texture chord to 0, 0. This will be the top left corner of the map. For our textures class, we will say textures equals new textures, sprite address, and sprite size. We will then say this set texture as pointer textures. We will then say this set origin as sprite size dot x divided by 2.0f, and sprite size dot y divided by 2.0f. Lastly, we say this set texture rectangle as text chord, and SF vector to I sprite size. So here we are calling our textures class and setting the sprite's texture as the texture that we're given in the sprite address. Here we are also setting the origin as 8 in and 8 down, because that is 16 divided by 2. And we are also setting the texture rectangle from the top left corner of the map to the sprite size, so we get our first sprite. Back in our .h file, we will need to be moving our frames, so we will say void frame right and void frame left if you want to go that way. We will also need to animate, so we will say void animate with a default delta time of float dt equals 1/60th of a second. Lastly, we will need to set our frame timer. So we will say void set frame timer and float frame time. Now this will not be setting the frame timer as in this variable, but the frame timer max. Now we will be quickly defining these. Frame right, frame left, animate, and set frame timer. And we can quickly clean this up. To move our frames right, we will first say this text chord dot x plus equals textures dot get frame size dot x. We also don't want it going beyond a certain area, so we will say if this text chord dot x is greater than or equal to the textures dot get size dot x, then we will set this text chord dot x equals 0. For going left, it's nearly the same. First, we just need to take this and change it to a minus. Then we'll say if this text chord dot x is less than 0, then we set it to this text chord dot x equals textures dot get size dot x minus textures dot get frame size dot x. For our animate function, we will say frame timer plus equals delta time. Then we say if the frame timer is greater than or equal to the frame timer max, then we're able to go right a frame, so frame right. Next, we say this set texture rectangle as SF int rectangle as text chord by SF vector 2i textures and get frame size. Finally, we will reset our frame timer. Frame timer equals 0.0f. To set our frame timer max, we can copy this and say frame timer max equals frame time. Back in our game.h file, we'll scroll up and say sharp include sprites.h. Then we will say sprites star sprites and then void init sprites. We will define this now. Say init sprites. In this function, we will say sprites equals new sprites and say sprites slash animation example dot png. That'll be our address, and it will be 32 by 32. And we want to set it to the center of the screen, so we'll say sprites set position width divided by 2.0f and height divided by 2.0f. If we want, we can set the frame timer, so we can say sprites set frame timer as 0.1f. We need to scroll down a bit. Here we will say sprites animate and dt. Going down a bit more, we will comment this out and we will say window draw pointer sprites. And finally, we will delete sprites. I'm going to uncomment these out just in case. Last but not least, let's comment that out. We will say init sprites. Scrolling back up, remember to comment this out, as well as delete these two and save. Now we can go into the debug menu and see that our example is animating. Thank you for joining me today. If you did, then please like, comment, and subscribe, and have a great day.